Hello guys, welcome to the second part of this video for the week number 3. So after the long introduction that I provided for Renaissance in the previous video, let's get a little bit down to business over here and let's discuss some specific characteristics of the period. So remember that in the Anglo-Saxon we had this German influence with the barbarians, the Angles, the Saxons and the Jutes that invaded and devastated somehow until a certain point the land. And then we have this French Norman influence in Middle English. So what we are going to see over here is that language is going to stabilize a little bit after Middle English. Let's say that in Renaissance we're going to have a language that is somehow close to modern English. Well, we will see a lot of different vocabulary that is that may be considered archaic by the time that was used by this time. I mean, that was used back then in Renaissance. But nevertheless, many of the structures, the grammar, and everything else started stabilizing in this period. So we will see that in further or future periods, the linguistic changes or additions are going to be much more scarce. Okay. Well, we have studied this period, this mixture of German, French, Old English, and everything else. And remember that we were talking about a return to better times, a return to a moment in which things were better or presumed better, no? Because normally when you get old, like the past always seems better than the present. It doesn't necessarily make it that way, but well, that is our perception. So there were like 3 important languages that influenced this period, and it was Latin, Greek, and French. And you will say, well, but we already talked about that. Like in previous periods, we have already mentioned that. So remember that it is like a return to what they perceive as better times, better moments, right? We will have that there are some words that were introduced or adapted into English language, but we will see that many of these are or proceed from this different amount of languages. Now, let's say that it is not only because of the origin or like they were created over there, but there are moments or there are examples in which topics or things or even stories of ancient Greece or some Latin roots or French roots were adopted and introduced into the language just because of this. So I have a really good example for that, and it's the word tantalize. I don't know if you know the meaning of that word, tantalize. You will see in the slide number 32. It's at the end of the slide in a parenthesis, in brackets. It's over there in case you have any doubts about how to write it. Well, this tantalize comes from Tantalus, and that is Greek mythology. Okay. So let me tell you the story of this word. It's only one word, and it's a verb, of course, no? Tantalize. So this Tantalus guy was, had a lot of different, according to mythology, right? Had a lot of different talents. He was good as writing cards. He was good as sometimes had some battle prowess. But one important, let's say, feat of this character was his ability to cook, right? So he was so famous for this that he one day invited all the gods. Yes. So imagine all these guys, Zeus and Aphrodite and Poseidon and all the guys, right? He invited them to have dinner, right? And he invited them to his house. Apparently, for a mortal to invite the gods and have contact with them, he must have been like a quite a good cook, right? And well, he gave them his food. This is a very good, very very impressive feat, because normally the gods had this nectar and ambrosia that were the food that they ate, and it was supposed to be divine and superior to anything that we as mortals can prove at some point. But well, he invited these guys to his house, and well, they were delighted. They really liked what he offered them, and well, they even asked for seconds, right? They say, well, this is so delicious, we want to try more. Tantalus, who was really a joker, a really funny person, what he did was to, in order to make a joke to the gods, or to play a practical joke on the gods, what he did was to kill his own son and cut him into pieces and put it into the food of the gods, right? And apparently this guy was delicious, and well, was so delicious that the gods even asked for seconds, right? Well, eventually the gods realized the horrible thing that Tantalus had done, and they were really angry, right? And they were angry not because of the horrible crime that was committed, but because they were made, or they were tricked into eating something impure. Yes, as human beings, to the eyes of the gods, we are impure and imperfect and not really nice, right? So they were really, really mad. First thing that they did was to somehow revive the Tantalus' son. They put him together from all these little pieces. They put him together again, and he was alive one more time, fortunately, except for one piece of his body that I think it was a shoulder. If my memory doesn't betray me, and well, they replace it with an ivory part, right? Like an ivory piece. But well, that is not the surprising thing. The surprising thing is that they were so mad at Tantalus that they say, hey, we're going to create a really creative punishment for this guy that tricked the gods and disrespect us and everything else. So they send him into Hades, that is like the let's say was the Greek version of hell, and they put them over there, put him over there, these Tantalus guys. Well, they put him in the middle of a river or a lake, something like that, a body of water, and they put him surrounded of these beautiful and really, really, really nice trees with all these different fruit that seem delicious, that seem really attractive, yes, very edible. So it was apparently a paradise, and what they did was to give Tantalus, or to provoke on him, infinite thirst and infinite hunger. Yes, so he was hungry and thirsty all the time in the middle of these different things. Well, not so bad, you would say, right? But well, the thing is that every time that he took the water, he put some water into his hands and was going to drink it, the water slipped through his fingers and he wasn't able to drink not even a drop of water, right? He was trying, nothing, impossible for him. He was hungry and he was trying to reach like the trees, the branches of the trees with this imagine supernatural fruit, like these really, really nice apples or melons or peaches or whatever. And he was just an inch away too far. Yes, he could almost touch it, but it was impossible for him to do that, right? Like to take a little bit or to even touch the fruit and then eat it. So he was perpetually hungry and perpetually thirsty, surrounded by water, by fruit, by something very tempting, but he wasn't able to satisfy himself, not one bit. So that was the tragic, well, I wouldn't say tragic, probably very well deserved, but the cruel destination of Tantalus. So now, let's go back to the word. What does it mean, tantalize? Tantalize means to tempt somebody with something he or she will never ever get. Not in a million years. Yes? So imagine that sweet girl who friends on you, yes, who's really nice, who's really, really cute with you and really friendly, but never in a million years will be your girlfriend or your wife or whatever, right? So she may be tantalizing you, yes, tempting you with somebody you will never get. So this is a story, a whole story about mythology, and this story was taken into let's say the common speech, and there was not a particular word for that, so they just use it and adapt it. Not Tantalus, that was the name of the guy, was sort of introduced or somehow assimilated into the language, right? And this happens all the time. Yes, so nowadays pretty common to say Facebookear, Googlear, WhatsAppear. They sound really horrible, right? But to me, at least. But nevertheless, everybody understands what is that. Yes, and it was a noun that was transformed into a verb, and everybody knows the connotation. Yes, and Facebooking maybe like updating your status and just scrolling up and down and getting into your groups and chatting. I mean, it's a whole set of things that is represented by a single word, right? So we have different examples of this. I was just trying to give you this one with tantalizing, right? If you go to the slide number 33, you will see at least 4 cases, right, in which Latin-based adjectives or words were introduced, right? And these are really interesting ideas, now, because it's, for example, like when we were in the Middle English period, what I mentioned about the food versus prepare versus animals, or good jobs versus poor jobs, right? So we're going to find something similar over here. Let's take a look at these 4 cases. So if you take a look at the first one, it says that these Latin-based adjectives were sometimes introduced to fill lexical gaps, okay? So there was a word somehow, but it was not so specific, right? It was pretty general, and in those cases, Latin-based adjectives or words or nouns were introduced for defining that activity or that characteristic or whatever, right? So let's think about the word marine. Yes? So marine is a Latin-based adjective, right? What does it mean, marine? What is that? And please forget about the military right now, because we're not talking about it. Yes, like there's a little bit before any sort of organization, even though we have like military well organized in the Middle English, well, it means something different. Now, so marine means relative to the sea. So we have marine animals or marine food, or well, all these different things, right? So before this Renaissance input, we had only the word sea. That was the noun for a body of water. But we didn't have that word that was specifically related to that. So anything related to the water or to the sea, it could be labeled as marine. Yeah. So as I mentioned before, we can talk about the animals or the food or transportation. Yes. So the inclusion or the introduction of only this word could provide a high or a wide range of opportunities, of communicative opportunities, right? Also, for example, the word walk. Yes, well, that was the verb, right, that was introduced, that was used until then, but it was pretty general, no? It was just the exercise of going up and down or just moving using your legs. But then we have something that is Latin based over here, that is pedestrian, right? So I trust that you are aware that pedestrian refers to the person who walks on the street, and that does not use an artificial transportation means such as a car. There in that moment, no. Right now we're talking about motorcycles or cars, automobiles. I mean, but back then, well, it acquired that meaning. So this is like the first case. Okay. Now let's take a look at the second one. That is a really interesting one, and it's Latin-based adjectives or words or nouns were introduced when there was an existing adjective, but unfortunately it had like acquired a negative or unfortunate connotations or ideas, right? So let's take a look at the examples that we have here, right? We have the word horsey. Yes, please take a look at the spelling of it. And well, you can imagine that it is relative to horses, of course. But unfortunately, let's say unfortunately, there were not other adjectives. Well, it acquired the connotation of having a horse-like features, right? Like you couldn't say that a person, or you could say that a person was horsey, suggesting then that he had probably a big mouth, a long face, something to mock somebody, to make fun of somebody. So if you wanted to say something different, not a joke or not let's say an insult, you were out of options, right? You didn't have that one, and that was annoying, right? So some words were introduced, such as equine or equestrian. Oh, okay, so this is very similar to the case of marine, right? So anything related to horses, competition, instruments, tools, practices, education, well, etc. Anything that goes around horses in a more formal way, was encompassed by the words equine or equestrian, right? Same happened with the adjective watery, right? We have the word watery, but this watery, what does it mean? Think about it, yes? Well, watery gives you usually the idea of something liquid but not really clean. Yes, probably something muddy, something that was inconsistent. I beg your pardon, but it makes you think of diarrhea or something like that, right? So that's watery. Normally not really something to use in a very adequate way. Like you couldn't say watery animals, for example, right? So some other Latin-based and Greek-based words, such as aquatic, were introduced back then. So remember that they're coming back to this nostalgia, with this nostalgia to the cradle of civilization that normally, or let's say Western civilization that normally is Greece. Region itself that was also highly permeated by Latin. So we have these simultaneous things, right? And then finally we have, for example, the case of windy in this case. No, so think about how do you say at certain states of time in Spanish, right? So how do you say sunny in Spanish? Oh, okay, you say soleado, right? And how do you say rainy? Okay, so you say lluvioso. Then how do you say foggy, right? Okay, con niebla, nublado, or something like that. Now in Spanish, how do you say windy in Spanish? Right, ventoso. But that sounds like a fart, isn't it? So this is what I'm trying to say, right? Like there are certain adjectives that are there and technically are okay, but we don't use for certain things. Yes, normally when you're explaining probably the seasons to your students, you will say con viento, con mucho viento, or something like that. You will never say ventoso, because then your class will be a mess and everybody will be laughing and discipline is over, right? So this is what I'm trying to mention over here with these unfortunate connotations, right? Well, so those were the first two cases. Then the third, we have some other words that were introduced from Latin or Greek that were simply additional synonyms, and eventually we use them indistinctly. Right? In modern English, we tend to use them with no differentiation. You can use one or you can use the other, and that will be just fine, right? So we have over here some examples, such as masculine and feminine, in addition to manly or womanly. Yes. So which are the Latin base and which are the English base? Well, of course, masculine and feminine are of Latin or Greek origin, and then we have this manly and womanly who are English base. English, the making the clarification that nothing is pure. We have already mentioned that. Then we have this, for example, paternal in addition to fatherly. Yes, so pater comes from Latin Greek, and fatherly, who is that is a little bit more English based. And then we have some other words that come in this case from French, right? And these are mostly expressions. So if you take a look, for example, of the samples that we have in here, it says soi-disant, right? That it's self-explanatory, for example. Yes, like you don't have to explain something if you say that something is soi-disant. Basically, it means that it doesn't require further explanation. Vis-a-vis, right? Like that is face to face. Visage, like in French, that's the French word for face. Sang-froid, that it's cold blood, right? What does it mean exactly, cold blood? Remember that it can be somebody who has not really feelings, or who can commit a crime or a horrible act without feeling any sort of guilt. Or also it can be a person who have, is not really nervous, or that he's able to handle situations without getting scared or getting nervous, right? It can be any of those acceptions for the word. Well, we have some other things such as crepe or etiquette, and all of those are mixtures or ideas from this particular period. Okay, very well. So we'll leave it over here in this video. In the next, we will discuss about the printing press that was really, really important for this period. It is a mechanic way to reproduce writing that is, of course, going to change everything forever in terms of not only literature but many other aspects. Okay, so see you then in the next video, and hugs. Thanks a lot.